Hi, my name is Nathan Sigworth, and I'm the CEO and co-founder at Pharma CCX. We leverage technology to help pharma companies and payers manage their negotiation and deal administration process for access agreements. Today is our next installment of Contingently Committed, our series where we interview experts in our field to learn about some of the latest advances at the intersection of finance, technology, and pharma. Today, we're going to talk with my friend and CCX advisory board member, Mel Walker, who's also the managing director at Biopharma Futures. Mel, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Nathan.
Why don't we go ahead and get started by you sharing a little bit about you and your background and some of your experience.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So I started off actually training as a pharmacist and a researcher at the start of my career, and then I had about 2 decades in the pharmaceutical industry in a range of different roles, essentially 2 top 10 pharma companies and a mid-cap pharma. I spent the last 10 years as an exec leading a range of different areas, including the market access areas, but also broader commercial areas like digital health, business development, pipeline strategy, and commercial launch teams. I definitely enjoy variety, but I would say that the first part of my career was really focused on leading market access areas. And I have to say it's still an area I'm very, very passionate about, despite broadening out into other areas. Last year I decided to take a change in career, and now I'm advising early stage clinical companies, specifically with a focus on helping them to maximize their chances of commercializing globally and not just in the US market.
That's really cool. So as part of that, I'm sure you encounter and probably you educate some of these companies on HTAs, Health Technology Assessment, which is, here in the US is, we do things a little bit differently, but I think in Europe and the rest of the world, this is sort of used as the standard in engaging with payers on drug pricing. Could you explain briefly what HTA is and sort of some of the strengths and challenges with that sort of approach to drug pricing?
Yeah, sure. So HTA is Health Technology Assessment. Very simply, I guess it's an evaluation approach that healthcare systems use to evaluate new technologies. Now, that can be any type of technology. We tend to think of it in terms of medicines, where it's sort of used the most. It's predominant in public payer systems, I guess ex-US. It's often taking multiple perspectives. It's important. So it looks at clinical, economic, social, organizational perspectives. It also tends to look at the relative benefit versus what's already there, the standard of care, if you like. And it's also trying to look at how does a product perform in the real world versus clinical trial performance. So given that sort of, broad definition, in terms of strengths, I think its main strength is that it's a value-based approach. And if you look at different payer mechanisms, there's a mix of value-based and non-value-based approaches. So
sure.
I'm a big fan of value-based approaches, which is why I generally support the concept of HTA, because it's definitely the best of, I guess there's no perfect mechanisms of making resource allocation decisions.
Of course, yeah.
But HTA at least tries to do that fairly, and I think that's important where you've got limited healthcare budgets. From a challenges point of view, I guess you're asking me from an industry point of view. One of the main issues really is lack of predictability for companies. Some of this is related to HTA or variability across different HTA bodies. I think some of it's related to varying capabilities that companies have in meeting HTA needs. But there's also a big chunk of variability that's linked to truly innovative products like cell and gene therapies, where the value is potentially very high for patients and for the healthcare system, but significant uncertainties relate to the products with high outcome uncertainty and high price tags are a particular challenge for HTAs.
Then more broadly speaking, I mean, tell me about, you've led the process of market access for companies. Tell me a little bit about that process. What are some of the challenges that you see? What are some of the things that could be made, could be done better, could be tightened up or made more efficient or more impactful for in terms of getting therapies to access?
Yeah, sure.
Getting therapies to patients. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. And I'm not, not to be pedantic, but I tend to use the term patient access as opposed to market access. I mean, market access is still a valid term, but I think market access often applies to, I guess, specialist capabilities within a company that are needed to deliver on a specific outcome. Whereas when I think about patient access, it more describes for me the goal of the entire company. It's what the whole company needs to work towards, because there's so many different skills and capabilities that are needed to get products into the hands of patients, that I think it must be a sort of mission of the company rather than just
it's why we all got into this in the first place, right? And I think that also builds bridges with the payers, right? Is we're working on one thing, and we're working on getting the patients the drugs that they need.
Exactly. I think that's where all of our sort of incentives are aligned in the system, for sure. I think there's a couple of challenges I'd like to mention. One is the issue I mentioned before around highly innovative compounds that are high priced, but there's significant uncertainty to manage over the longer term. I think getting these products into the hands of the patients is challenging. We need to find a way through these challenges, because there's a whole raft of potentially game-changing therapies for patients coming over the next few years. And actually, I want to see those products reaching patients and delivering health outcomes in the real world. Probably the second issue I talk about is healthcare system dynamics. And this is really about companies not thinking sufficiently about the phase of getting products to patients post-national reimbursement. I think we see, even with cell and gene therapies, even where national reimbursement has been delivered, you can see the uptake is poor. And I think this poor uptake is linked to really thinking about what are the other steps that need to be unlocked in order for patients actually to get access to the product. And not only get access to the product, but also to see the real world outcomes delivered, the health outcomes delivered to the patients that we hope that they will receive. And I think that company medicine value propositions will increasingly depend on this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are there any global trends that you see as having an impact on patient access? Has COVID affected this at all, or do you anticipate it will? How do you see things changing as we go forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe I'll take the first one, then come back to COVID. So in terms of global trends, I think there's lots of trends which continue in market access, and it's all sort of going in the same direction. But I think one of the we talked about it earlier. We talked about HTA, but I think more broadly speaking, the area of value assessments. I think and the reason why I think this is because I think we're seeing winds of change in the largest pharma market, which is the US. All of the discussions around drug pricing over the last couple of years, the work of ISA, etc. I think that this is it's not about whether it's going to change. I think it's about when it's going to change. I don't necessarily see the referencing of European prices, for example, in the short term happening, although that is possible. But I do think that these sort of value assessments will be used in reimbursement and coverage decisions more and more in the future. I think you can already see that payers are starting to look at the reimbursement of products in areas where companies have more robust clinical data. This is already happening, even where the FDA has given a broad label. So I think this is just the thin end of the wedge. And interesting enough, I think you can see the market response to this. So if you look at companies are taking more conservative approaches to taking on price increases, for example. I think you see emerging players like EQRx who are really looking to shake up and deliver more affordable medicines in the US to patients in areas like oncology. So I do think this is signs of early winds of change, really. And so I think that's the sort of to your first question. Then you asked about COVID, and I'm asked this question quite a lot. I don't believe actually that COVID will dramatically alter the mechanisms used for market access by healthcare systems. But what I do think it will do is it will drive some headwinds and tailwinds for sure for pharma companies. I think the main impact will be budget pressure. So we'll definitely see healthcare systems refocusing resources in areas that that additional pressure will mean that governments will have to get much more out of biosimilars, generics. Me Too products will be more heavily discounted, I'm sure of that. Evaluations of truly innovative drugs will also become more challenging, and the existing mechanisms applied more rigorously. Benefit assessments will be tougher, for sure. But I think the good news is the industry knows how to navigate these issues.
Yeah.
The issue is we just need to do it better than we've done before. And in my view, there's lots of room for improvement actually here.
Yeah. Cool. I think the way in which this value-based health technology assessment that happens in Europe, I think is very misunderstood, particularly in the US context and the US market. I think it's been sort of a bit of a political football bandied about. What do you think? What do you think people in markets like the US typically misunderstand about HTA or about the patient access process in general?
Misunderstandings. It's interesting. I think people misunderstand the for-profit motive. I think this is quite common. The idea that for-profit can't sort of coexist with delivering medicines to patients. I truly believe in the philanthropic motive. I have a family foundation, so I'm very invested in that type of work. But for me, in medicines development, the for-profit motive is essential to driving medicines development at pace. If you think about VC investment, for example, there was a paper I read recently which talked about the number of FDA approvals, I think it was in 2018, from VC-backed investment, and it was about 40% of the approvals. So VC investment companies are willing to take big risks and gambles on truly innovative or potentially innovative products for patients that even big pharma might not be willing to take. So, and that wouldn't happen if you didn't have the for-profit motive.
Of course, yeah.
I do believe that working in healthcare does bring a real sense of responsibility of doing the right thing. Do I believe that we, as an industry, must put patients first? Absolutely, yeah, and always above profit motives. Yeah, that has to happen. And unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't, and that's where regulation comes in, because hopefully regulation makes sure that the industry does the right thing and protects patients from bad actors, and also, I guess, the industry reputation as well.
Yeah, cool. So this series is called Contingently Committed, and everything we do is about making contingent commitments and helping people make contingent commitments on our exchange. Tell me a little bit about contingent commitment in your life.
Interesting. Well, I think Nate, I became a father fairly recently. Yeah. Actually, my little boy is nearly 2. One of the things I've noticed is how my life choices have changed since that moment. And now, I guess all of my life choices are fully contingent on the commitment I've made to my family and to being a good dad to my little boys. So that's probably the biggest contingent commitment in my life.
Yeah, and it's amazing how sometimes, with kids, those contingent commitments become straight up commitments, no longer contingent on how they behave.
That's very true. I guess I guess it's unconditional commitments to my kids, but I guess my life choices are contingent on making sure I can deliver on the
changes things around a little bit. Yeah,
sure.
Cool. Well, great talking to you, Mel. Thanks so much for your time on this. Talk to you later.
Have a good day.